Elizabeth disliked her new neighbour from the very beginning. She didn't want to pry into someone else's life, but it was impossible not to notice how workers were unloading monstrously huge audio speakers from the truck, as well as a strange painting, as if someone had just splashed a bucket of paint on the canvas. So, he'll be listening to loud music. Artistic taste, by the way, can say a lot about a person's character as well. While transferring string beans, sour cream, bread and other groceries from the shopping bags to the fridge, Elizabeth shook her head disapprovingly, still thinking about the person with whom they were to share the staircase. "Mum, are you angry with me?" Jay, who was spinning around waiting for the promised chocolate, interrupted the woman's thoughts. "Angry? No, why? Why do you think so?" "Because you pressed your lips and frowned so much that you became all wrinkled." The first grader shared his observations. "Everything's fine, my dear. Don't worry. I'm going to prepare dinner now," the woman said with a smile. "Look at this. The new neighbour hasn't even moved in yet, but my mood is already ruined." When the neighbours, who have lived here all their lives, started to sell the apartment, Elizabeth worried about what the new tenants would be like, and it turned out her worries were not unfounded. In general, the apartment building was peaceful. Although not elite, it was located in a residential area with a rich urban history where every street was a monument of architecture. The hallways in the buildings were well maintained. Fluffy asters and elegant delphiniums bloomed annually in the flower beds in front of the entrance. And in the courtyard, formed by almost circularly arranged buildings, mothers safely let their children play without fear. Elizabeth raised her son alone, as her boyfriend had disappeared upon learning about her pregnancy. Unfortunately, Elizabeth's parents had already passed away from incurable diseases long before her son was born. She often thought that if they were alive, she might not have rushed into the arms of a man who only talked about love, but couldn't demonstrate it through actions. The first few months after the baby was born were challenging, but distant relatives supported her, and some acquaintances shared baby items. Elizabeth managed to earn some money while on maternity leave by illustrating children's colouring books. Later, she returned to work and was doing quite well, as the private gymnasium paid art teacher a good salary. Once, Elizabeth was on her way home. She stepped into the elevator and was reaching for the button when suddenly an unfamiliar voice sounded behind her. "Wait for us, please." Elizabeth, being a well-mannered person, pressed the hold button but immediately regretted it when she saw a tall man rushing towards the elevator. He had curly long hair and was wearing ripped jeans and a black leather jacket. However, it was not his appearance that frightened her, but the dog walking next to him. Even though the dog was on a leash, one look at its big, fanged mouth and tiny black bottomless eyes was enough to instill fear in even the bravest heart. Therefore, Elizabeth quickly released the hold button and stepped back into the depths of the elevator. "I'm sorry, I'm not taking the elevator with both of you," she said, leaving the stranger with the dog in front of the closing elevator doors. After finding herself back in the cozy confines of her apartment, Elizabeth breathed a sigh of relief, but then she heard some noise on the staircase and was driven by her curiosity to peek through the peephole. There, she saw the man and dog. That, and the unpleasant truth dawned on her. They moved into the apartment across the hall. The next morning, as Elizabeth hurried to work, she was surprised to see the same stranger from the day before standing outside the building. He was staring at his smartphone while his dog sniffed at the flowers in the flower bed. "You know, the common areas in front of the building are not meant for dogs." Elizabeth's voice sounded unkindly and unexpectedly haughty. "Do you think he'll eat the flowers?" the brunette retorted, lowering his sunglasses to the tip of his nose. "Oh, we've already met." Elizabeth's face flushed as she adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and defiantly lifted her chin. "I just don't trust people like you." "Is this about me or Caesar?" asked the man with a smile. "Excuse me?" Elizabeth abruptly interrupted. "I don't have time for idle talk. Please keep an eye on your pet and put a muzzle on him. People actually live here." The brunette watched Elizabeth's slender figure move away with a pensive expression on her face. "Don't be offended," shook her head elderly neighbour Mrs. Rivers, who unwittingly heard this conversation. "She doesn't know that your dog is good. However, our Elizabeth's a kind woman. She teaches children to draw." The man had no chance of escaping Mrs. Rivers' story, and after 5 minutes he had a full verbal portrait of his neighbour. Over the next 2 weeks, they met several times. Of course, this is not unusual, and sometimes we meet our neighbours, but for some reason it seemed to Elizabeth that there was some kind of terrible fate in all this. Otherwise, how else to explain the fact that they both reached for the last can of canned red beans at the same time? "I'll give it to the lady. I'm a gentleman," said the neighbour with a smile. It was a Hollywood-style scene, and Elizabeth thought he could conquer any woman except her. She didn't like frivolous and arrogant types. One day, Elizabeth caught her neighbour doing a strange thing. He threw a gorgeous bouquet of white roses into the trash and kicked the bin. Walking past Elizabeth on his way home, he gave her a strange look, as if she was responsible for some kind of misfortune. "That girl dumped him." Elizabeth overheard a snippet of conversation between the elderly neighbours basking in the sun on the bench by the entrance the next day. For some reason, she thought that they were talking about her neighbour and no one else. What was she missing? "If only I were half a century younger," said Mrs. Rivers, and laughed. However, in general, Elizabeth couldn't find any reasons to be unhappy with her neighbour. He didn't listen to music too loudly and didn't bother anyone. The days were getting shorter and the nights were getting colder. October crept up in a scarf made of burnt leaves. One day, Elizabeth and Jay were late coming home from distant relatives, and they had to pass through the alley, where ghostly shadows darted under the light of dim lanterns. A man unexpectedly emerged from the bushes, swaying and exuding danger. Another one joined him shortly. "Hey, beauty, don't you want to meet someone?" asked the first one. "What are you doing here?" spoke the second person, who looked like he had no permanent residence. Elizabeth instinctively squeezed Jay to her and stepped back. She should have called a cab, rather than walking around here, hoping that it wasn't too late, and here would be passers-by. And now they were practically alone. "Why are you shaking your bag? Is there anything valuable?" snarled the first person. Suddenly, a strong and commanding voice rang out. "Get away from her!" A neighbour with a dog emerged onto the park path. The dog looked impressive, surrounded by shadows, growling so terrifyingly that it was clear he couldn't wait to sink his teeth into whoever the owner pointed to. "Yes, that's right, this is a mean dog." The neighbour smiled and gracefully released part of the leash, allowing Caesar to move forward. "We like to run here, and if you don't want him to run after you, quickly move away from the woman and child and get out of here." "Let's go," said the first man, nervously swallowing. His companion didn't make him repeat, and soon both men disappeared into the depths of the park. "Thank you," Elizabeth said with relief. "You saved us," she added shyly. "No big deal." "Wow, "Does he bite?" Jay asked with enthusiasm that made it clear he would be terribly disappointed if it turned out such a beast didn't bite. "Maybe, if it's a bad person and I order him to," the neighbor replied. "But deep down, he's a goody-goody, and he likes someone scratching between his ears." "Wow!" Jay was an obedient boy, but he darted so quickly that his mother couldn't stop him. Elizabeth didn't even have time to be scared, as the child started stroking the dog, and he responded with content growling. "Can you escort us?" Elizabeth asked shyly, pointing towards their apartment. "Of course. We are just on our way home," the neighbor shrugged. They took the elevator together this time. Before going to their own apartments, Elizabeth suddenly touched the neighbor's sleeve and asked, "Excuse me, I still don't know your name." "Dale. Good night. And you take care of your mum and watch over her." The neighbor winked to Jay with a smile. After that, Elizabeth began to treat her neighbor better. Not only did she start greeting him, but when she ran out of flour at home and the dough for the pie was practically ready, she asked Dale to share a cup of flour with her. In gratitude, Elizabeth treated him to her signature cake. Then the first frost had hit, and Dale got sick. It was impossible not to notice, judging by how he coughed and breathed hoarsely. Summoning all her courage, Elizabeth volunteered to walk his dog. Contrary to her worst assumptions, Caesar turned out to be a terribly well-behaved pet. The time went by. On New Year's Eve, they exchanged gifts as a neighbor. Elizabeth gave Dale a scarf, embarrassed by the banality of the gift, but Dale warmly thanked her and assured her that he definitely wouldn't get sick again with such a gift. Jay gave Caesar a funny squeaky toy duck. Dale gave the boy a remote-controlled tractor, and his mother received a set of paints, which, coincidentally, she had been dreaming of for a long time. During their time together, Dale and Elizabeth learned a lot about each other. Dale traded art objects and ran a small art gallery with his cousin. He also had surprising knowledge of antique furniture restoration. "You two are a good match," Jay said, causing Elizabeth to choke on her tea in surprise. "You're both creative people." "Don't be ridiculous," Elizabeth responded. "And by the way, it's time for you to go to bed, my great matchmaker." But it so happened that Elizabeth began to see Dale in a different light and wondered how he felt about her. Everything was resolved on a balmy April day when the first buds began to bloom on the trees. Caesar was running around the park, sniffing for something. Dale was wrapped in a gifted scarf. "Don't you think spring is a time for change?" he asked suddenly. "Maybe," answered Elizabeth, concentrating on the reflection of the sky in the puddle. "Don't you think it's time to decide about us?" "Oh, I have to go home. I most likely forgot to turn off the oven," said the woman with a trembling voice. Dale seemed to ignore her words. "I don't want to ruin everything, but I just can't help inviting you for a cup of coffee right now. And this will be our first real date." "Dale, what are you talking about? What kind of date?" "The most ordinary, and I believe the most beautiful. I like you very much." "And what about our friendship? And by the way, we're grown-ups. If it doesn't work out," Elizabeth tried to argue. "Then you can say no right now, and I won't offer you anything else. I'll just be your friend and tolerable neighbor, like I was until this day." Elizabeth sighed. Men, where did Dale get so much audacity? But she admitted to herself, and mentally, that he was only doing what she, who did not believe in fairy tales and signs of fate, would not dare for anything and never. "I guess I would have to agree," she said finally, and smiled shyly.